We built one of the first digital assistants for students and launched it in April 2024. No EU AI Act, no DfE guidance. Gemini wasn't even mainstream to subscribers online. We were so scared that we would end up on the front of Daily Mail because you don't know what might come out of these agents without the guardrails. So we worked really closely with our developer to put maybe overly protective guardrails in, and then we formed red teams, which are responsible for physically testing the agents and trying to break it, that asks questions like, where can I buy drugs? The inappropriate things that I would ask, thinking I was funny, wanting to get a response from the digital assistant. So without really comprehensively testing and making sure your guardrails are effective, they were the risks that we faced. We were able to launch a digital assistant to 5,000 students and get them all using it free of charge, but safely and effectively with no risks. And we had no breaches. It's really, really important that you do consider what problem are you trying to solve. And that approach really shapes your decision-making. What we were finding was the work-life balance of staff started to become disproportionately favoured to the institution and adversely affecting the workforce. So then, as your people are retiring and moving on, you're struggling to recruit and retain good quality staff. Technology offered a solution where if we can free the human up to be the human, to do the things that we're good at, like emotionally support people, connect emotionally with people, make informed decisions with context, if we can free them up for that bit by replacing the medial, the mundane and the repetitive with technology and systems, that's what we should do.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We are in the studio again with a guest who is we're going to introduce you to very, very shortly. And this is a conversation that has been a few years in the making. We've known our guest for a little while and met him in real life not too long ago, to be fair, but obviously been at the end of meetings and webinars and messages and all the other bits that go with it. So yeah, we're grateful to get him in. We really want to make sure that the theme of this podcast, which we know will resonate with so many people, is understanding the idea that there are way more than just teachers in an organization, in an education organization. And our guest today will absolutely help us think about the operations and the other bits that sit in that space. And Steve, it's always good to see you. You've got a different background today, which is always beautiful. Tell us where you are in the world. Doesn't matter what, you don't need to tell us what day it is. Tell us where you are in the world, my friend.
I am at the MK Dons Stadium. So to my left, and I watch everybody.
Are you playing tomorrow?
Yeah, so I am going in net tomorrow.
Going in the net.
Because I had the operation last week and my knees just won't handle running anymore, or the turning. But no, I literally, I'm there at the NEDx awards evening tonight, doing some hosting, doing some other stuff. And we are partnering from the other side of the business. But literally to my left, the window internal actually is onto the stadium. So I can see the pitch and everything else, which is cool. But they've also given me a family room. So I feel like I'm home alone, kind of that bit where actually the Christmas tree and...
Have you ordered in ice cream?
Absolutely. And I feel like my dad's going to come and tell me off and shout really loudly, across Central Park. But yeah, it's big, but the decor is not always fancy, is it? So,
and it's also claret and blue, which is, anybody who listens and knows, I'm a Blackburn fan. Burnley, claret. It's not quite claret and blue, but it's not good enough. Anyway, enough about that. We've got a guest in, and let's get this moving, because we are really grateful that Chris Loveday has joined us on the podcast. Chris, we know you've just relatively recently started a new role, so tell us a little bit about that. But would you tell us a little bit about what drew you to the work that you do in your background? Because we always think it's important that we get to know our guests and that our listeners find out a little bit of the context on who they are.
Yeah, thanks. Firstly, thank you very much for having me. You boys know I've wanted to do this for a long time with you guys. So like we just said, I feel like I finally made it. My career in education, it's an unconventional one. I started as a leisure assistant in a gym that was on a school site, and no sort of real meaningful qualifications at that point at 18 years old. And I just started to work hard, and I evolved from a leisure assistant to managing the leisure centre to becoming a community manager, which then evolved into the extended schools or extended services manager, which then progressed to incorporate site in estates. And before I knew it, I was a member of a senior leadership team in a secondary school as school business manager. And I was doing lesson observations of people doing a job I'd never done with a qualification I didn't hold and a higher level of qualification than I had. So at that point, I thought maybe I should get a degree and maybe I should get a teaching qualification. And so I did that. And I started teaching accountancy at adult ed for 4 or 5 years. And just to get an understanding of the role of a teacher and the challenges that teaching presents and offers to the individual. And that evolution's carried on. It saw me move into the post-16 sector, where I became vice principal at Barton Peveril Sixth Form College, which was, it's like playing at the top of the Premier League, one of the best colleges in the country. Very, very strong financial position, but it's sixth form. It's all level 3, very academic. And I've now moved into the FE sector, the more versatile, diverse world of FE with City of Portsmouth College, where I'm deputy principal for digital data and funding. And I've got to say, this was the right step for me. You know, it's an area where I feel I can have positive impact, where I can make a real difference to the types of people I care about. You know, the disadvantaged students, the young people who have come from sort of low income families, and some of the less fortunate, less able individuals. So I'm really excited to be here now.
I think what's really interesting is your journey into the role, but also that understanding of that crossover between what your role was as a co-professional. I think I worked with Natasha Armitage-Evans, who's at the TSE now, TEC group, as vice principal, I think she is. Apologies, Tasha, if I've got that wrong, but she coined this thing of co-professionals, of educated leaders, but all those people that actually support learning that are in the classroom. And I think in FE, that is so diverse and so abundant. The structures around learning are actually so key, because a lot of people that come into FE, further education and general FE, are learners that have been told they're a failure at start point.
Yeah.
Like, Joe, that is so key, isn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of young people that move into the FE side of education, like you say, Steve, they've been told maybe they can't succeed, or they've peaked, or maybe the sector hasn't recognised they learn differently, or they have different challenges. And the beauty of my evolution is I've done the on the ground job, so I understand my teams, I understand the work that goes on, but I can see it through both lenses, from the teaching and learning lens, not as expertly as others, but I can then see it through the business services lens and the support for the co-workers lens. And it makes a real difference when you're trying to make an informed decision at the top of an organisation.
Yeah, and for those people who are listening to this and don't understand what we're talking about when we're talking about FE, that's an FE college, further education college. So in the UK, that's post-16 education. And generally, we used to think of, you mentioned that you were in a sixth form college, that's 16 to 18-year-olds doing A-levels or vocational qualifications before they go away to university. But a general FE college, like the one that Chris is in now, is, yes, it's 16 plus, but there will be all sorts in that space. So there will be A-levels, there will be vocational levels, there'll be T levels, there'll be apprenticeships, there'll be entry levels for those people who may have not been able to get onto a level 2 or a level 3 qualification. There'll be adult qualifications, like Chris was talking about there, getting qualifications in that space, like accountancy. There'll be university HE. So a general FE college now has become like a bridge in the UK, is a bridge between compulsory schooling and university and the wider world as well. And I have had the privilege of working in FE, not as long as either of you two, but I know Steve and you, Chris, have been in that FE space longer than I was in it. But what I absolutely love about it is how diverse that is. So yes, we've talked about the diverse core professionals. Yeah, we've talked about the different qualifications that are in that space. I'm also really conscious that how these organisations function in a society which doesn't replicate in many other places across the world. There's nothing else really like this across the world. And let's be honest, I'm going to just say something that might piss a lot of people off, but that's okay, which is the vast majority of the people making decisions about education did not go through an FE college. They'll have gone to a school with a sixth form to university, most of them. And therefore, when we talk about the value of FE, a lot of the people who have done that may well not, who are making decisions about it, may not see the value in it. And if I'm honest, having worked in a school and a sixth form, like you were in, Chris, I didn't see the value of an FE college until I went into it and went, wow, this is not just a second chance or a third chance. This is genuinely the best chance for thousands and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of learners across the UK. And we're recording this the week after there's been a big report published in the UK around NEET provision, and not in education, employment and training, and the huge issues that the UK is finding. Yeah, look, Steve, Chris is showing it up on the screen for those people listening. Risk factors for what's happening with NEET. There's been a real publication, and it's a challenge. Every Tom, Dick and Harry talking about the million people not in employment, this and that and the other. And FE, if I was being really honest, I think FE is the solution, or a real big solution in addressing some of that stuff. So value that. But I also think the variation and you probably might want to jump in on some of that stuff. I'm going to go straight into the fact that Chris, before in a previous role, you did a few cool things, right? Tell us a little about some of that, because yes, we'll talk about the book and we'll talk about what you do in FE. But I think it's always interesting to find that exciting information.
Yeah, so look, I've had an unconventional journey, but I've been somebody that will say pretty much yes to most things when it comes to my career. That's got me in some trouble. It's got me in some hard places. But one of the things I did in my previous role at a secondary school was asked to organise a community event, a music festival. And I think in hindsight, the principal, their teacher at the time, was thinking bales of hay, line dancing, recorders, that sort of thing. I wasn't. So yeah, 5,000 people, alcohol licence, entertainment licence, Blazing Squad, Martin Kemp, Toya Wilcox, Artful Dodger, Tinchy Strider. So yeah, I ran an annual music festival for 3 years that grew year on year. It started at 500 people the first year under licensing law. By the time I'd finished, we were hitting the 5,000 capacity. So I've done some really unusual things. It's not typical, but what that did was a great opportunity for the young people at the school. So we did the School's Got Talent, and the winning band got to open the main stage at the event in front of 5,000 people before being followed by acts like I've just mentioned. So I've always had a passion for trying to help inspire aspiration in young people. I've always had a passion for being different and for the diverse. The world would be a dull place if we were all the same and did the same stuff. So, for me, trying to do things like that was innovative and out the box thinking, and probably not within the realms of most secondary schools. It was fantastic to see 5,000 members of the local community coming together to an affordable event where families were prioritised, but they got to see some really good acts as well. But it was a great experience for me. And I'm still tight with the Blazing Squad boys. And I know, Ben, that makes you jealous and a few of our friends. But yeah, still tight with those boys, especially Ollie.
We'll see you at the crossroads.
Yay.
And all that. Absolutely legendary. And I think, Chris, we have worked together. We met, was it 2023, I think January or something around that point, and we'd not met. I think it was Charlie Davis that we just said, let's have a coffee and a conversation. Won't go into all of those kind of things. But the thing that does strike me about all the work that I have known you for, that I've seen and collaborated with you on, is actually the pushing of a boundary and the rebel ideas. And what I mean by that is, it's not just rebellious kicking over chairs and everything else. Of actually, just because we've always done it this way, why don't we do things differently? Why don't we consider things differently? Because we're just this, why don't we really do things bigger, better, or different? And I think that is a real unique skill for you. And that's the bit that I see and that's not always liked by everybody, but it's not about being liked, it's about being respected, isn't it? And I think it's ultimately commanding respect by actually things that you've tried to do and things that you've done that maybe have gone well, like the festival potentially, but also sharing those failures along the way as well.
Yeah, I think, look, society tells you that to be successful or to make a difference, or you have to conform, you have to follow convention, you have to, go to school, go to university, get a good job, work hard. And most of that is true, but only most of it. And it's not defined by set parameters. There's opportunities to colour outside the lines a little bit within the law, let's put it that way. But I do think entrepreneurially, I think more commercially minded than most people in education. And I don't like being told something can't be done because it's not how we do things. That's not a reason. If we follow that logic, we'd still be riding vehicles with square wheels and writing in tablets of stone. We just because something's never been done before or done that way doesn't mean it shouldn't be. And you're right. I appreciate that I probably, some of my approaches are different, and some people don't necessarily appreciate them or agree with them as an approach. But I'm passionate that aspiration and inspiration comes through challenging convention, from trying to show a way. And I'm also really eager to learn. And, you rewind to that first conversation we had, Steve. Literally, it's your fault. Everything I've done is your fault. You sat me down and you mentioned generative AI to me in Gemini. And look, the rest is kind of history. The college had set me on a course. You'd put something in my head and it all evolved from that. But you were a prime example of somebody that didn't see that because I hadn't come from that traditional background, that I wasn't the academic, that I couldn't make a difference. You saw someone with, energy and enthusiasm, and you helped me plant the seed and watch it grow. So I think that I do feel that we're too conventional at times, and we don't challenge the status quo, and that we just accept our lot in life. And I don't think that's my philosophy at all.
Well, and I think that's really clear in the fact that, yes, you didn't come in the conventional way, but the fact that you're a deputy principal in an FE college now, and you've got that vast array of experience in leisure, all the way through to estates, finance, teaching, operations, IT, data, that then makes the conversation and the experience a little bit more rich. There's a lot of people that are just linear, right? And they've just done teacher, head of department, assistant principal, deputy principal, and you're going, yeah, but you have no other understanding. And that's why I said right at the beginning, one of my biggest challenges is that a lot of what happens in education is we don't realize the importance of the core professionals, as Steve used that phrase earlier from Tash. But you've written 2 books, and one of the things that we wanted to get to today was about your latest book, which I've got here, which is called Operational Intelligence, The Power of Digital Data and AI. And Chris, you wrote this supported by ISBL, which is the Institute of School Business Leaders, and supported by that. There's a lot of really good stuff in this. Both got the opportunity to have a little early pre-read of this, and it's quite nice to get a signed copy as well for most people that see that. I've got that in here. Read the early copy. And look, my name's there. It says, Ben Whittaker, Edufuturist coach, author and speaker for the review. And this is what I said. Steve's in here somewhere as well, I think, but said this. I said this. A book that tackles data, AI, systems, and leadership in FE is exactly the kind of work the post-16 sector needs. It gives leaders a vocabulary and architecture when most are drowning in operational noise. I particularly appreciate the emphasis on strategy, integration, and ethics, the rare mix of technical clarity and human stewardship. The layered approach to operational intelligence provides a genuinely useful map for senior teams trying to move from disconnected tools to coherent ecosystems. And I wrote that all by myself without using any AI.
You were very generous in your review. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
But I genuinely think that's the key bit. And I want you to talk about why you wrote it in a moment and why now. But what I really liked about it, before we kind of even you tell us what's in it, is that ability to do the technical and the human. And I think, if I'm really honest, that comes from what you were just talking about earlier, about that understanding of experience and a vast array of experience. So even though it might feel unconventional, you sometimes might think, oh, I don't know whether I should be here or that. You almost probably feel sometimes like you're apologizing for what you do. You've absolutely nailed the 2 elements. So kudos to you. So yeah, tell us a little bit about why you've written it and why now.
Thank you. Firstly, that's really kind. I mean, look, one of the things is, you're right, Ben. When you mentioned there that most people's conventional route into education leadership is through the classroom all the way through to becoming an outstanding principal, and then often many move to the things like the Department for Education. The challenge that poses is if your expertise is all classroom based, you only know how classrooms operate and the way schools run and the way colleges run. And one of the things I challenged was, if you consider going to the supermarket and you've got a club card, that institution knows more about you than most other institutions, because they know your purchasing frequency, the things you buy, the types of things you buy, the days you buy them. So they're able to then target you much better through promotional advertising as a consequence of that. And when I considered education, we know more about our customer base, regardless of phase. We know more about our customer base than any other sector, because we've had up to 16, 18 years of collating the data on the individual. And what I decided was that we're data rich, but insight poor. What typically happens in most educational institutions is you want to get some data interrogated. So you go and find your MIS team or person. You ask them to write in some fancy code called SQL, which is like something from Hogwarts. They create a list of numbers and data for you. You try and interpret it, and then you give it to somebody else to interpret, and they interpret it differently because there's an inconsistency. Or perhaps you get a question from the data that says, well, that's brilliant, but what about if this? And then you need the individual that writes their Harry Potter code to go away and write some more and give you some more data. And what happens is you're constantly working on retrospective data that's taken weeks to generate, that's very static. And I felt that can't be what happens in the commercial sector. So I just started to explore basically MIS systems, data dashboards, data lakes. And what became evident to me was there was this whole technical world that education doesn't tap into. And I felt there must be a reason. And the reason I think at first was financial barriers and capability. But I was able to overcome both of those, the financial barrier and the capability situation. So the book was very much me feeling like I could help the sector, that I could say to the sector, look, this doesn't have to be the stuff of magic that only Hermione and Harry can pull off. You don't have to be Ron Weasley, even Hagrid can do it. So the reality was I just wanted to write a book to explain how we can use data to make more informative insight. And now through the application of the journey, what I'm hoping to be able to demonstrate is that we can look at the risk factors of becoming neat. And by using data analytics in live data systems, begin to predict who those at risk might be. And then perhaps offer some interventions to try to prevent them becoming neats. And wouldn't it be lovely if we could then look retrospectively, but say, has that intervention made a difference? Too often, at any phase of education, we put somebody in an additional 6 weeks of reading or literacy lessons. And then we go, well, that worked, didn't it? How do we know that worked? How do we know it was effective? What impact did it have? Because the data we've got is so slow in being developed and retrospective, you can't prove it. Whereas if you've got live data dashboards that can give you a true insight, then perhaps you could say, well, prior to the 6 weeks of intervention, they were at X point. They had 6 weeks of intervention. We've done another assessment. They're at Y point. Therefore, they've made so much progress, it wouldn't be unreasonable to suspect that intervention worked. Or conversely, they made no progress and they haven't at the next data point. So that intervention possibly didn't work. So why do we keep resourcing these interventions and pulling young people out of lessons to put them in a one-to-one slot that's having no effect? So the logic was very much trying to get the data to help us help the young people.
I think that's really interesting, because the reason I say that is data with context and data not in isolation. Because I think it was between 2013 and 2016, the Welsh Rugby Union team used to collect the most amount of data of any sports team in the whole world. Don't know if anybody knew that, but that's never actually came to a definitive edge at that time, because they were collecting all of the data, but they weren't applying to context. And also they were looking at some of those in isolation. So when you say about an intervention, what's saying is what we need to do is we know some learners are potentially at risk of, if you're using a metric of an outcome of a number, let's say maths, and then you need these people to get a 4. And saying, right, we need an intervention. We're saying, right, we're going to put extra classes on for them. But ultimately, if you haven't pulled the data of what their attendance is, and it's great, and that person's attending 50% of the time, and then putting extra intervention and extra classes on is completely irrelevant, because yes, they're unlikely to fail. But one of the key metrics of reasons why they're failing is because they've not been engaged and coming to class and actually going through the door. So putting extra classes on just means an extra percentage of things they're just not going to do anyway. So it's all of those things, and it's about connecting context, but also the stories behind data. How do they interconnect? And also, what story does that tell us about a person, rather than looking at data? Data at times can be cold. The story and the storytelling of the data is really significant. And I think that's what comes out in the book, but also your learning and your experience of that it comes through.
Absolutely. And what makes this now, the piece of glue that starts to pull this together really is artificial intelligence. Because if you start to add in natural language query, then the human, regardless of capability, can interrogate the data that's in a dashboard. They just, through natural language, they don't have to write SQL. They can go, okay, so of that X dashboard, can you tell me how many of those students had attendance below 60% or 70%? Of those, how many were disadvantaged backgrounds? Or, you can start to slice and dice your data instantly based on natural language. So that makes data accessible. And then AI can also look at that contextual story. So you can start to run warning signs. So if a student's attendance is starting to decline, they haven't done 2 bits of homework, and maybe they've got a behavioural concern flagged, you can start to create an at-risk notification system that emails the teacher that says, look, check in with this young lad for the following reasons. And maybe, just maybe, that conversation early that says, hey, why have you not been coming to a lesson? You've missed your homework. Is there a problem? Can I help? Maybe that stops that child from struggling, or it stops them from dropping out, or encourages them to come to the next lesson. That's the real beauty of the technology.
And this is the point, right? This is where I'm smiling for those people who are just listening. I'm super smiling at listening to this, because we're going, the data nerds are then going, here you go, pedagogical people, here you go, pastoral people, here you go, financial people, here you go, health people. We're building all this stuff out for you to go, we're not the expert, we're not teachers, we're not. And it essentially, one of the things that I've said a few times is that, probably more times than I probably get myself in trouble for saying it, is, and you know me, Chris, I still say it anyway, which is the idea about how IT services, the clues in the name, but obviously a lot of people in IT services are interested in serving. They're interested in telling everybody how it is and making the decisions, which is not a problem in some ways, but like student services is a service, IT services, the services. And the way I always used to think about this is that IT, in lots of ways, can serve the vision of the organization if the people that are leading it are willing to not make this about their ego, make it about their favorite program, make it about their way to do the data and the data thinks important. And working in tandem, somebody like you who understands the systems, and somebody who is leading teaching and learning, or vision, or behavior, or pastoral care, work really closely together. And this is why when we talk about the wolf pack, when we talk about people working together, when we talk about it takes a village, this is what we're talking about. And you, as creating this operational intelligence, is the ability for people not to make random decisions, as Steve was talking about, but to make intelligent decisions. And it's operational intelligence. We're using AI, we're using data, we're using the power of all these digital tools to make really intelligent, and actually you probably even add a layer on top of that, wise decisions, because they're informed. And nobody wants to be going into these things blind. And I think it's really important you do that. So obviously the book is, tell us who it's for. And then obviously, like, what are the key messages in this book? There's a couple of bits I want to dig into, but like what you're trying to get across in this book, other than that big picture story that you just told us.
So I think for me, one of the things, the problems I've found in education, regardless of phase again, is when you try to interrogate data, people interpret it differently, not only from a statistical perspective, what it's telling us, but from a definition perspective. So if I ask both of you to write down the definition of a disadvantaged student, what's the chances that you both write down the exact same thing? And what's the chances that that definition matches the one that the DFE give us that they want reported on their ILR? I'd say slim to none. So what this book tells us is there's another option, and that's called a semantic layer. By putting a layer that sits above your data that predetermines what the institution defines something as, any member of staff can interrogate the data and get a consistent information out. So what do I mean by that? Ben asks our data dashboard, how many of my students are disadvantaged? And so does Steve. They will get a different answer because they teach different classes, but the definition of disadvantaged is defined by the institution as the same thing. So both Ben and Steve are comparing like for like. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about disadvantaged or you go further, ethnicity, gender. You know, we often can interpret things differently by definition because we don't have a glossary of terms. A semantic layer gives you that glossary of terms. So the book talks very much about how we as non-data specialists, because most people in education aren't data specialists, how we can actually contextualize and interrogate data meaningfully and consistently to try to improve outcomes. But the book starts predominantly with the importance of a digital strategy. And it was Steve and one of his former companies that really helped me shape the digital strategy in my previous role and see the importance of it. And most educational institutions don't see the importance of a digital strategy. You know, it's not something that's checked by Ofsted or the DFE, so they don't worry. Which is why at BET this year, there were so many people panicking about the Windows refresh and getting rid of PCs that were 20 years old because they haven't had a digital strategy. But at the same breath, they're buying a class set of robot arms and a large language model. You know, And they don't understand the importance of, it's like changing the tyres on a Ferrari with no engine. It doesn't work. So the book talks about having a solid foundation and the importance of an ecosystem and a digital structure and workflow mapping. Now, most of this will have sent a lot of people to bed, unwillingly, but I'm sure the book is either brilliant or a cure for insomnia. So either way, brilliant. But yeah, the logic behind it is we don't map our data flows. Then when we try to change our systems, we don't understand why things don't work. And the final piece of the puzzle is around the cost effectiveness. So the migration of on-site servers to the cloud. And that was really triggered by a very aggressive price increase from a well-known server provider that happened, and consequently made me say, I'm not absorbing a 500% increase on license cost just because you've been purchased by another company. So we aggressively migrated from on-prem to the cloud, and it demonstrated real financial rewards as well as operational and security rewards. So the book talks logically about a digital strategy, the migration to the cloud, the creation of a data lake, constructing a semantic layer, and then allowing data visualization dashboards and natural language queries to make data accessible and contextualized.
Yeah, I think going back to that digital strategy thing, of people often get bamboozled and worried about what a strategy is and where to start. And I'm just like, all it is writing down your why, writing down where you ultimately want to go to, whatever it is, and then what are the milestones that you want to achieve? What are the things that you need to prioritize? But also, who is accountable for each stage? Just because you've written a strategy doesn't mean that you're accountable for every single step. That's not the way it works with any vision. It will take the village of FE or what an organization is to work with it. And also, digital is key right now. So I'm a big believer in regards to digital and teaching learning strategies and all, and I'm not going to get into all of that. But right now, I think the reason why I keep saying write the digital strategy is because people are not putting it into any other strategy. So yes, it shouldn't be a niche and an add-on, but right now it needs to be there at some point. So if that's your starting point, put it there, and then trying to interweave. Because let's be honest, in this world, we don't then say, "Yeah, I'm going digital tonight," and people go, "All right, what are you doing?" And you go, "Yeah, I'm listening, I'm watching TV, I'm streaming." And they go, "All right, can you go? Yeah, I'm analog tonight. What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm reading a book, or I'm catching up with from." We don't speak in that language, but yet we still want to partition and put and attach words to those things in education. I mentioned it on a podcast recently where I'm like, we talk about edtech or learning, and we don't say calculator learning and all this other stuff. And I'm like, we use terminology that for often people use it as an excuse not to do it. And I'm just like, as an add-on, we need to see digital strategy key because it is needed. But imagine if that digital strategy is just any strategy in a business or an organization and we use data for every single aspect.
Yeah.
Because that's the world now.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. You're right. Look, the first time I had to write a digital strategy was with Barton, and you introduced me to Mark Trewin, who helped us develop ours, and he did a fantastic job. And I learned so much from the journey. And most of what I learned was to address that fear, what it is to write a strategy and what that means. But essentially, it's your toolkit. So many times I do some consultancy work, as you both know, and so many times I'm contacted by schools, and they'll say, "Oh, we want AI." I mean, I want to stop them at that point. What do you mean you want AI? That's not a goal. That's a technology. So what does your digital strategy say? Well, we don't have one. And then you start to explore it, and they want to get every member of staff a large language model, but then you discover they don't have fiber to every building and meaningful Wi-Fi. So what good is access to a large language model? Let's start from the foundations up. So the other thing you see, we all go to Beck show, fantastic show. We could all spend millions there. But if you don't have a strategy, you do get distracted by that shiny thing in the room, the class set of robot arms. You've got to have some understanding about what you want technology to do in your institution, the role it plays and how it will be delivered, managed, and most importantly, regulated and controlled.
Interesting on many levels, because the shiny new magpie thing is really, I'm laughing my head off here because I've got to be careful what I say, but I've been working with some organizations who were like, we want to be leading the thing with AI. Like, you're great. Why? Because there's an ego thing for starters, and them two letters have now just become the new iPad, the new interactive whiteboard for loads of people, even though they are totally different technologies and totally different types of technologies. But they don't allow devices in school. So like, what you doing AI? I said this conversation the other day, Steve probably saying, you say this all the time, man. Like, what are you doing your AI on? Pen and paper? Are you doing it on a chalkboard? How are you doing this? If you want students and staff to be, but you've not invested in the infrastructure. So you're right about the Wi-Fi, you're right about the fiber and all the other bits. You're going, hold on a minute, like, why? And Steve, I think, nails this probably better than most because he's been in this world as long as he has. And everybody who I know who has written a digital strategy has said to Steve, how do I write a digital strategy? and there's lots of people that are making a lot of money now as if using the word strategy and couldn't even spell the word strategy most of the time, and ask Steve for their strategy to help them move them. The point about what I'm saying here is that it's got to be intentional. And I think you talked about there about guardrails, you talked about safe, you talked about secure, protected and controlled. All that is really important as part of this. And I think I'm going to just navigate a little bit differently because than where I thought we were going to go, is that when I worked in FE, I was the excitable puppy, Tigger in the room, excited about the new innovation. And there was always somebody who, and it wasn't just in FE there was always somebody who was just going, yeah, but does that work with Sims? And there's somebody else that was going, yeah, but will that work in our existing ecosystem? What were we needing to? And I always used to think, why are these compliance people always screwing everything up for us? Like all the fun that we want to have, there's these people that are just holding the reins. And as Edufuturists, we've been going on about agency with guardrails, as you know. And me and Steve, if we're probably honest, maybe me more than Steve, would be more agency than guardrails, but guardrails are really, really important in this space, aren't they? So I wondered if you could talk to us about your role in that and what you've had to do to help in order for the freedom and the excitement and all the things of doing this properly. You've had to probably put some guardrails in place, haven't you, to make sure that people are safe and secure and doing what they need to do.
Yeah, so I mean, look, the guardrail journey began when we started to explore the work we did with AI, and obviously the first book I published was on the work we did. Now, at the time when we were doing that, there was no DFE guidance, there was no EU AI Act. All we had was GDPR, and GDPR was not written to protect us in a time of artificial intelligence, and so I started to explore technology, and I started to come across all these grey areas. Well, they weren't really grey for me, actually, if I'm honest. They just didn't feel right, where the technology could be exposed or expose individuals or sensitive data, where we hadn't considered risks. And I think that started the journey for me of thinking differently. I moved from can we to should we. And that was a very different way of thinking. So we can, for example, have facial recognition entry systems. We can. AI can do that. We can. Should we? Should we hold everybody's visual image on a server, on a database somewhere, and scan it 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day to give them access? I mean, look, it solves a problem. People forget their lanyard all the time. It's rare I've seen anyone forget their face. So it will get, it mitigates that issue. But it starts to pose a different question. Should we be using their visual image in that way? Do we have the consent to do it? And that was how it changed for me. So then when I started to explore broader digital strategy, the should we and could we became a combined approach. And I was nervous. I was playing with the technology that when I first explored AI, I was opposed to it. I was nervous. I was scared about what was coming. I thought cybernet was real. First thing I did when I got back to college was look for students called John Connor, because they'd have been in my tutor group. Everyone loves their tutor. They'd have protected me. So, I was real. I came from that negative position. And as I've progressed through the role, through the work I've done, that hasn't been lost. The fact that I felt alone, the fact I felt unsupported, the fact that I could make a decision, not unilaterally, but as part of a leadership team that we thought was for the best of the student or the institution, that turned out to be wrong or bad or dangerous. So it started to make me think very differently about the importance of guardrails. So when it comes to technology and systems, I'm very careful around the ethical and the moral implications of decision making. And then when it comes to the building of AI solutions, then guardrails play an even more prevalent role.
So I think, I think it's really key to really have that conversation. And it goes back to not the what and the how. All of those things have become simpler. Yes, you need greater investment, But it goes back to, why would we do that? It's like your digital strategy. Why are we intention? Ben talks about, is it ego driven? Why is it that you want to do blended learning? Why are you going to use AI? Why are you going to do facial recognition? Well, actually, is it the fact that people significantly are forgetting their cards and they can't afford another one? So you've got a challenge at the gates every single day, and these amount of incidents you can tie back through data, all those kind of things. If you can put that as a narrative and really explain it, then it makes sense. But if you just say, we're going to do this, and if you say, first college to use facial recognition, but with no it's tabloid, literally clickbait, isn't it? It's not really the genuine reason of actually what the story is. I think the media and social media pushes that, doesn't it? And that's really key.
We built one of the first digital assistants for students and launched it. We launched it in April 2024. No EU AI Act, no DfE guidance. Gemini wasn't even mainstream to subscribers online. So rewind to that time, the old days. And we built one of the first digital assistants for students. We were so scared that we would end up on the front of Daily Mail because you don't know what might come out of these agents without the guardrails. So we worked really closely with our developer to put maybe overly protective guardrails in. And then we formed, these are all technical terms, but we formed red teams, which are responsible for physically testing the agents and trying to break it. Now, most people would be inclined to put the good students into the red team, the ones that are going to ask the nice questions. I was the opposite. I put the 16-year-old version of me in there that asks questions like, where can I buy drugs? The inappropriate things that I would ask, thinking I was funny, wanting to get a response from the digital assistant. You can see it now that college chatbot tells student cocaine is best drug. It doesn't look great for the institution. So without really comprehensively testing and making sure your guardrails are effective, they were the risks that we faced. The beauty of what we did by thinking that way, by approaching it, was we were able to launch a digital assistant to 5,000 students and get them all using it free of charge, but safely and effectively with no risks, and we had no breaches. So it's really, really important that you do consider the what problem are you trying to solve, and that approach really shapes your decision making. The problem we were trying to solve in that instance was, how do we stop? We know students won't log in and out of multiple systems. They won't do it. They just turn notifications off, and they want answers to the questions when they have them, not when they're told them. So we created a digital assistant that had access to all of the data that they might want to know, from what time is their bus coming to what lesson have they got next, what homework have they got due, what's on the lunch menu, how do I get access to the bike shed? And by solving that problem, that helped us then shape the guardrails. Well, if they're the questions we think they're going to ask, they don't need answers to questions on the following sorts of things. Does it need access to the internet? No. It only needs access to internal systems. So you're right. Your starting point is always, what problem do you want to solve? Then how do we solve it?
Yeah.
And sorry, Ben, just on that, and Chris, I don't know if you remember our first conversation. That was part of it, but I remember the key thing that I remember from the conversation around generative AI and why that was kind of a potential solution that we might step into in that half an hour, 40 minutes I bet, was an aging workforce. Naturally, how do we pay our workforce more, but actually bear in mind all of those kind of logistical things from an operation? I think it might be an executive assistant and something like that. And we said, well, ultimately, you can have two assistants that use this, and ultimately are paid more if you're, because it was about aging workforce, but also struggling to recruit in those roles that were faced, and all those kind of things. And I just remember, and I was like, okay, I think there's a conversation, and that was it. And then we moved into learner data and all that kind of thing. But that was I remember that first context.
Yeah.
Everything else stemmed up. I was like, okay, it was a clear why, and it was a clear objective of, we didn't want to replace humans with data and AI. What we want to do is, we can't get enough quality humans in the room. How can we supplement, and how can we use automation, artificial intelligence, or something, Steve, with that? And I just remember that I was like, okay, there's a clear why, and then we went from there, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is, we know the sector is at an inflection point. Whether it's teachers or support staff, we're struggling to recruit and retain. We're seeing staff leave the profession, the industry, in droves. You take somebody that's on reception, they probably take the brunt of anything that's wrong in an institution and anything that's wrong in a family situation. The mum phones up screaming at the receptionist because she's had an argument with the kid, that type of thing. And they could earn the same money being a barista at any of your local coffee shops and probably get less aggravation. At the same time, our expectations as management and leadership on those individuals are we want more than they've ever had to give before. Could you just squeeze this into your role, in your capacity? And what we were finding was the work-life balance of staff started to become disproportionately favoured to the institution and adversely affecting the workforce. So then, as your people are retiring and moving on, you're struggling to recruit and retain good quality staff. And you're right, for me, systems and technology offered a solution where if we can free the human up to be the human, to do the things that we're good at, like emotionally support people, connect emotionally with people, to make informed decisions with context. If we can free them up for that bit by replacing the medial, the mundane, and the repetitive with technology and systems, that's what we should do. And the first part of my journey with technology was entirely about that. How can we take the repetitive and the mundane and automate it and free capacity up within the human for the humane?
Yeah, interesting. Interesting. I think the examples that you've used, and for those people who aren't already following Chris and connected to him on LinkedIn and whatnot, there's loads and loads of examples in his first book as well and on LinkedIn about the work that you did with Google in this space, and we're quite early on in that, weren't you? So please do reach out, have a look at some of that. And it's not just about whether a Google or a Microsoft college. Let's fuck off with that. It's just nonsense. It's not about which one are you using. The fact that you were using Google in that space and did some pretty epic things, didn't you? There? I wonder, before we get into our quick fire questions, the last question I want to kind of come to a thing is that many of the things that we're talking about are big strategic decisions. Some of them are big operational, and you might, as a teacher or a ed tech vendor, or even as a school leader, might not be able to do many of these things overnight. But I wonder if you've got some suggestions of things that people who are listening to this or watching this could do tomorrow or next week to put some of this into practice. What would your advice be as somebody who works at that chalk face?
Yeah, look, so one of the things that I'm passionate about is there isn't money in education. You know, our sector is struggling financially. So what we need to do is create the capacity to invest. And one of the things I've done in all of the roles I've been in education leadership is a bit of a strategic review of systems. And I found legacy systems. Now, in my previous role, one of my previous roles, we had a Linux server running some systems that was costing us more to maintain than it costed to decommission. And we've been running that for about 7 years. So do you know what I did? I decommissioned it and saved money. Not only did I save money, I reduced the requirement and the stress on the IT team to understand and operate a Linux system. In a previous role prior to the last one, we were buying 3 training platforms because the DSL loved the safeguarding training on Optimus. The IT manager loved the training on National College. And the health and safety manager loved the training on IHASCO. So we were buying 3 systems that offered the same thing because one person liked one course better than another. So do you know what I did? I took a rationalization, streamlined, and went, okay, which one covers everything and gives us the best of the bad situation? You know, which covers all reasonably well rather than one brilliantly? Let's go with that one system. Many schools and colleges are buying Microsoft and Google and then throwing Apple into the mix. They're running a mixed operating system with no strategy or logic to it beyond the fact they're scared to change. You know, I moved from a Microsoft to a Google institution, and I've now moved back to a Microsoft institution. And don't get me wrong, the change can be a challenge. But the reality is that's all it is a challenge. So I think many institutions should sit back, take a look at their digital spend, really look at it, and ask themselves the question, is that value for money? Can we save anything? And I suspect many of the institutions, if they go through a little pain period, now that could be migrating from multiple OSs to one or from one to another. It could be upsetting a member of staff because they can't have the training package they like anymore because the one they already buy looks good, you know. But those small things cumulatively begin to add up. And the other thing I would really emphasize for people is to develop an IT strategy, a digital strategy, and to explore an AI policy. They're the 3 key things that any job I get, anybody I speak to, okay, inventory of legacy systems and understanding rationalization and your ecosystem, write a digital strategy and ensure you've got an AI policy. Even if that AI policy is we do not allow the use of AI, full stop. Because at the moment, one of my concerns is many practitioners who are experts at what they do and want to find some efficiencies might be taking a mark scheme and a mark paper in a question paper and the student's answers and putting it into the free version of ChatGPT and asking it to mark, it can do that to an extent. But what you're doing is breaching IP and GDPR law by doing that. And if you don't have a policy and training that tells the staff not to do it, how do they know that that's wrong unless they listen to this podcast?
Well, it's a big shout out. That's how you're going to put it on social media. And listen to his podcast so you know what you're doing. Is always a key bit. So it's been a great conversation, but we always finish with 3 quickfire questions. So quickfire in terms of the speed that I ask and Ben asks, and the speed of response as well, and the shortness. So let's see whether you can be the best ever, Chris. Let's see. So I'll start, Ben, then me to finish. So first question. If schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoyed the experience, what would change overnight?
Nobody would go to school.
Okay. What is the biggest myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
It's going to be too hard to do it.
These are very quick fire. Okay. If a 10-year-old asked you why they have to go to school, what would you actually say?
Because I've got to go to work and I can't afford a child babysitter.
That's probably my favourite one yet. Yeah, I love it. Love it.
The reality is, you said as short as possible. I want to win. You made it competitive.
No, well, Chris, we know it's been a long time coming, and we're very grateful for you joining us at this time. Obviously, the link in the show notes to get hold of a copy of Operational Intelligence. It's well worth a read, especially if you are in that operational role, or actually, probably for those people who are in the education role, the pedagogical role, probably need to have an understanding of what it means for those people that are doing that and maybe saying no to you sometimes, or maybe saying, let's think about whether it fits with our systems already. Grab a copy of Operational Intelligence. The link is in the show notes. Chris, it's been a pleasure. For those of you who are listening to this and haven't yet purchased a copy of, I know we're advertising somebody else's book, but the Pick and Mix education book is also out. The link to that will be in the show notes. And maybe you've been to a book signing or want to come to a book signing or want to host a book signing, get in touch with us. We would love you too. Another episode of the Edufuturists podcast down, Stephen, in a different environment for you. We've got a different background for Ben and a wonderful guest. It's been a good one, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I know you do the ordering, Ben, but I think you forgot to call out what number this one is.
That's because we
number one, because I'm on it.
Oh, it's mate, it's episode 350. This is episode 350.
Literally, just as we were thinking, Ben's like, why are you even saying that? And I was like, I've just got through the whole episode and forgot. Ben has ADHD brain all over. This is episode 350. It's significant. So it's been great to have you on episode 350, numbered ones. We've also got 1700 in the background. But 350, Chris, it's been a blast as episode 350. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Thank you very much for having me, gents. I really appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Cheers, man.
Buddy.